In 2022, a researcher at the University of Chicago named Filipos Papakonstantinou ran an experiment that should have been front-page news in every personal finance publication in the world. He gave a group of participants access to their complete Facebook activity data, every post they had liked, every ad they had clicked, every page they had followed, every minute they had spent on the platform, and then tracked their purchasing behavior over the following 6 months. The correlation he found between specific patterns of social media engagement and subsequent spending was so tight, so consistent, and so specific that it was difficult to dismiss as coincidence. People were not just being passively influenced by the ads they saw. The platform itself, the architecture of the feed, the sequencing of content, the specific emotional states that the algorithm was designed to produce, was functioning as a purchasing engine. And the people using it had essentially no idea. This is not a story about advertising. Advertising is old. Humans have been trying to persuade other humans to part with their money since the first market. We have defenses against advertising. We know what it is. We know what it wants from us. We have learned to be skeptical. What social media has done is something categorically different. It has created an environment in which the manipulation of purchasing behavior happens at a level of psychological sophistication, at a scale, and with a degree of personalization that has no historical precedent. And it does this not through the ads themselves, which are, in many ways, the least interesting part of the system, but through the emotional and social architecture of the platforms themselves. To understand how this works, you need to understand something about how social comparison operates in the human brain and why the specific environment of social media is so extraordinarily effective at exploiting it. Social comparison, the process of evaluating yourself by reference to others, is a fundamental feature of human cognition. Leon Festinger, the psychologist who first described it systematically in 1954, argued that humans have a basic drive to evaluate their opinions and abilities, and that in the absence of objective standards, they do this by comparing themselves to other people. This is not vanity. It is a cognitive tool and a genuinely useful one in the right context. In small social groups, the kind of groups humans evolved to live in, of perhaps 150 people, social comparison provides real information. It tells you where you stand. It helps you calibrate your sense of what is normal, what is achievable, what is appropriate. The problem with social media is that it has taken this ancient cognitive tool and applied it to a reference group of millions of people, curated by an algorithm optimized not for your well-being, but for your engagement. And engagement, the platforms discovered early and have confirmed repeatedly, is most reliably produced by content that generates strong emotional responses. Specifically, content that generates the particular cocktail of admiration, envy, and aspiration that is produced when you see someone living a life that is more beautiful, more successful, more abundant, or more exciting than your own. Every time you scroll through Instagram and see a holiday you have not taken, a restaurant you have not been to, a home you do not live in, a body you do not have, a life that looks more curated and more complete than yours, a neurochemical event is occurring in your brain. Dopamine drops slightly. The reward circuitry that is normally associated with pleasure and anticipation is activated not by the presence of something good, but by the gap between what you have and what you are seeing. This is not a metaphor. It is measurable. Neuroimaging studies of social comparison processes have documented the specific brain regions involved: the ventral striatum, the medial prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and shown that downward social comparison, seeing someone who is less than you, produces measurable activity in reward circuits, while upward social comparison, seeing someone who has more, activates circuits associated with threat and aversion. What the social media platforms have done, with extraordinary efficiency, is create environments in which upward social comparison is the dominant experience. The algorithm does not show you an accurate cross-section of how people live. It shows you the most visually appealing, most emotionally provocative, most engagement-generating content available, which means, overwhelmingly, content that makes your life look modest by comparison. The friends who post most frequently are the ones who are traveling, renovating, celebrating, achieving. The influencers who dominate your feed are the ones whose aesthetic, whose apparent affluence, whose effortless abundance is most aspirational. The ads that appear between them are calibrated by machine learning systems to the specific desires and insecurities that your behavior on the platform has revealed. The result is a carefully engineered emotional state that psychologists call relative deprivation, the feeling of having less than you feel you should have, based not on your absolute circumstances, but on your perception of what others around you have. And relative deprivation is one of the most reliably documented drivers of impulsive and compensatory spending in the consumer behavior literature. People who feel relatively deprived spend more. They are more susceptible to status signaling purchases. They are more likely to make purchases that they cannot afford and will later regret. They are more likely to prioritize visible consumption, the things that can be seen and assessed by others, over investments in their long-term financial health that are invisible to the social gaze. A study published in the Journal of Consumer Research in 2020 found that participants who had spent 30 minutes on Instagram before being given a shopping task spent on average 25% more than participants who had spent the same 30 minutes reading a neutral news website. The Instagram group also showed significantly higher rates of what researchers call aspirational purchasing, buying things not because they needed them or even particularly wanted them, but because the items were associated with the kind of life they had been seeing on the platform. The platform had, in 30 minutes, successfully shifted their reference point for what a normal life looks like, and their spending followed. The advertising on these platforms is only the most visible layer of a multi-layered influence system. Beneath the ads is the influencer economy, which operates on a principle of parasocial relationship, the feeling of closeness and familiarity that viewers develop toward content creators they watch regularly, even though the relationship is entirely one-sided. Research on parasocial relationships consistently shows that people apply significantly lower levels of skepticism to recommendations from people they feel they know, compared to recommendations from strangers or explicit advertisements. An influencer whose daily life you have been following for 2 years, whose children you know by name, whose relationship struggles you have heard about, whose morning routine you could recite. That person's product recommendation lands in a completely different part of your brain than a television advertisement. It lands in the part that processes the advice of trusted friends. This is not accidental. The influencer economy is specifically built on the parasocial relationship as a commercial mechanism. Brands pay not for reach alone, but for the quality of the emotional relationship between creator and audience, the degree to which the audience trusts, admires, and wants to emulate the person recommending their product. The Federal Trade Commission and equivalent regulatory bodies in Europe have required disclosure of paid partnerships, but the research on disclosure effectiveness is sobering. Studies consistently show that disclosure of a paid relationship between an influencer and a brand reduces purchase intent by a small amount, often less than 10%, while the parasocial trust mechanism continues to operate largely intact. Knowing that someone is being paid to recommend something does not fully neutralize the emotional persuasion produced by years of parasocial intimacy. Beneath the influencer economy is the algorithmic architecture itself, and this is the layer that is least visible and most powerful. The recommendation algorithms of platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube are optimized for a metric called watch time or engagement time, the total amount of time users spend on the platform. This is the variable that determines advertising revenue. Everything else, the content you see, the emotions you feel, the social comparisons you make, the desires that are activated and intensified, is downstream of this single optimization goal. And the algorithm has learned, through billions of data points, that certain emotional states keep people on the platform longer than others. Curiosity, outrage, admiration, and most reliably and most durably, aspiration, the desire to have what you are seeing, the gap between your life and the life on the screen. Aspiration is, from the platform's perspective, an almost perfect engagement mechanism. Unlike outrage, which is intense but exhausting, aspiration sustains engagement over long periods without producing the emotional depletion that causes people to put down their phones. You can scroll through aspirational content for hours in a state of low-grade wanting that is uncomfortable enough to keep you seeking, but not uncomfortable enough to make you stop. This is the state that the algorithm is continuously working to produce and maintain. And it is, not coincidentally, the state that is most associated with compensatory and aspirational spending in the consumer psychology literature. The platforms have also, in recent years, dramatically reduced the friction between the desire produced by their content and the act of purchasing. Instagram shopping, TikTok shop, Pinterest Bible pins. These features are designed to collapse the distance between the moment of aspirational activation and the moment of purchase to the minimum possible. Research on impulse purchasing consistently shows that friction is one of the most powerful inhibitors of impulsive buying. Every additional step between the desire and the purchase, every moment of having to navigate to a different website, enter payment details, confirm the order, is an opportunity for the prefrontal cortex to intervene and evaluate whether the purchase is actually a good idea. The one-tap purchase eliminates those opportunities. It is designed to get the money moving before the rational brain has a chance to say anything. The data on the financial consequences of heavy social media use is now substantial enough to be taken seriously. A 2023 analysis of banking data from over 2 million customers in the United Kingdom, conducted by a fintech research group in collaboration with 3 major banks, found that customers who self-reported as heavy social media users, more than 3 hours per day, spend on average 18% more of their disposable income than customers who reported less than 1 hour per day, controlling for income level, age, and geographic location. They also saved significantly less. On average, heavy social media users were saving 8 percentage points less of their income than low users with equivalent earnings. The gap, annualized and compounded over a working life, represents a difference in wealth accumulation that is difficult to overstate. The mechanism is not simply that heavy social media users see more ads. It is that they spend more time in a state of algorithmically managed aspiration, more time in implicit social comparison with a curated sample of the most affluent and most visually appealing lives available, more time in a psychological environment that is specifically optimized to make their current life feel insufficient. And insufficiency, the felt experience of not having enough, of being behind, of missing out, is one of the most reliable triggers of compensatory spending that consumer psychology has identified. There is also a more subtle mechanism at work, which researchers have called identity-based consumption. The algorithm learns, with remarkable speed, what kind of person you want to be seen as, what aesthetic, what lifestyle, what values, what social tribe you are aligning yourself with. It learns this from the content you engage with, the accounts you follow, the products you click on, the aspirational figures you return to most reliably. And having learned it, it feeds you a continuous stream of content that both reflects and reinforces that identity, including the products, brands, and consumption patterns associated with it. You are not just being shown things you might want to buy, you are being shown who you could be if you bought them. And identity is a much more powerful purchasing motivator than desire. People will spend money they do not have to maintain a sense of who they are and who they want to be seen as far more readily than they will spend it on things they merely want. The practical question is what to do with all of this. The answer that is most commonly given: use social media less, be more mindful. Just remember it is not real, is not wrong, but it is insufficient. It treats the problem as one of individual awareness when the problem is structural. The platform is not accidentally producing these effects. It is engineered by some of the best paid engineers and behavioral scientists in the world to produce exactly these effects. Individual mindfulness is fighting a battle against institutional sophistication with a considerable asymmetry of resources. The more structurally effective interventions are ones that change the environment rather than trying to change the person within the environment. The research on this is consistent with the broader literature on financial behavior change that we have covered in previous videos. The most effective changes are architectural, not motivational. Removing the apps from your phone rather than trying to use them less. Turning off notifications rather than trying to ignore them. Removing payment information from shopping apps so that the friction of purchasing is restored. Using browser extensions that block certain categories of content. Setting up a separate email account for commercial communications so that the inbox you check for important messages is not the one that delivers promotional content to you at moments of vulnerability. But perhaps the most important shift is cognitive, and it requires understanding the specific mechanism being exploited. The social comparison that social media activates is not comparing you to a realistic sample of people. It is comparing you to an algorithmically selected sample of the most aspirational content available, generated by people who are either genuinely affluent, professionally skilled at appearing affluent, or both. The reference group against which you are unconsciously benchmarking yourself does not exist as presented. It is a construction. It is a highlight reel of a highlight reel, filtered through professional lighting and editing and the commercial incentives of the creator economy. Knowing this does not fully neutralize the emotional response. The social comparison mechanism is too automatic and too fast for intellectual knowledge to fully intercept it. But it can create enough distance to interrupt the chain from social comparison to impulsive purchase. And that interruption, sustained over time, is worth a very large amount of money.